record on my computer and started. Hello, this is Stacy. I'm here with the Human Experience, and I have Mr. Emmanuel Maize with us this afternoon, continuing to carry our message of love, strength, connection, hope, and all of that great stuff. So, welcome. I have known Emmanuel, I guess, now for a little over 2.5 years, it feels like. Time is moving.
Yeah.
I think we started in 2018 creating a program that worked with At Promise Youth. And we have done some really, really great collaborative work, in my opinion, in being able to offer the solution to these young men that Mr. Manuel works with. So I wanted to be able to invite him to come on to the show so that he can share on some of these new and amazing things that he's going to be doing working with men into his private practice, into the future. And so we want to talk a little bit about what you have planned for us.
Well, I am really excited, and I want to thank you, first of all, for thinking about me and having me be a part of this experience. When I thought about it, sharing what motivates me as a licensed professional counselor to work with men is the need for men to be more transparent, more congruent, and live in their whole self.
Man.
I realize that men, we are hunter-gatherers, and we are often motivated by old messages and tapes that can guide us in directions that are sometimes not healthy.
Sure.
And we also tend to compartmentalize our lives in a way that hinders healthy relationship growth. I can say that men have made a lot of strides over the last 50 years as a result of the feminist movement and with the now Me Too. Men have to be more woke and aware.
What do you think has shaped sort of the past? So you're talking about like that there's always kind of been these past. Like what do you see as being the things that have shaped that for most
men? In terms of, make that a little clearer for me.
So like in terms of like you're talking about like there's sort of been the way that men used to respond to like women's issues or women's movements and
I think it was part of that whole patriarchal system.
Okay.
And roles and the roles that men play in the lives of, in their life. I mean, in women's lives and their relationships. And that hadn't always been good. It relegated women to a back seat or to a position of follow me.
Okay.
And now, more than ever, equality needs to be represented in relationships. More women are working outside of the home, and even men are now stepping up and some men are the caregivers.
Sure.
So with that, there's a need for men to be able to express themselves better and in whole. When I talk about men who compartmentalize their lives, and I call it boxes. We have a box for this, a box for that, a box for different things that we experience in our lives.
So for somebody that might be watching, can you give an example of like what might be something that would be in the box?
Some of those boxes,
please, if you don't mind.
It's some of the hurts that we've experienced. Say, like myself, my father was a Methodist minister. He was 20 years older than my mom. And my father never told me, I can never remember my father telling me he loved me. And I struggled with that. And then when my parents divorced, she married my stepdad, who was a good provider, but he was an alcoholic and very tyrannical. And so I experienced with that some domestic violence, and a lot of pain in terms of there were two sets of kids, his kids and us,
Got it.
and
Okay.
he separated us.
So it was
Um,
obvious that it was like us and them.
it was obvious. So I had to stuff that. That was
Okay.
something that even though I had brothers, but a lot of my brothers, older brothers, had grown. They were grown and had left the home. So I struggled with that uh, piece of being affirmed that you need from your dad. I think that in working with boys and working with young men
Mhm.
um, that don't have their fathers in their home, they struggle with that piece of being affirmed. Am I going to be okay? Do you approve of me as a man? It's just something that they can hold on to. It's a rites of passage. I never got that. And I had to struggle to find that. So that was a box. Another box is I got married the first time. And unfortunately, that marriage didn't work out, had a child, and had issues with co parenting, especially when I remarried. Went through court proceedings, and it still never got any better. And ultimately, I saw my daughter when she was 7, and I didn't see her again until she was 18 at her graduation. That was another box.
Got it. Okay.
And so those are some of the boxes that I'm talking about that men women have more opportunities to process. You're just made that way, that you have opportunities for process. Men don't process as much unless called to do it.
Now, and I was going to ask you, do you think that that's conditioning? Do you think it's like, I mean, do you think that's based on like the family history and what you're taught, or do you think society says it's not okay? Where do you think that that kind of comes
I
from?
think it's a mixture of a lot of things. I don't just think it's conditioning. I think it goes back to some of the old tapes.
Mhm.
The hunter-gatherer, we have to be strong. It's tied into masculinity.
Yeah.
And it's about being transparent and showing too much of the raw self.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that raw self is a part of that we need in relationships to be healthy.
Mhm.
And those are the problems that when men move into relationships and they haven't processed those pieces or those boxes, they tend to come out at times when unexpected.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so part of what I'd like to do in my work with men is to help them clean out those boxes and to allow them the opportunity to give themselves permission to make those to be more congruent and to be able to to realize that those boxes don't have to be compartmentalized. They can come together and they can give us strength. It's how you use it. Um, I know that one of my favorite movies is Grapes of Wrath.
Hmm.
And Grapes of Wrath was about a movie, and it was in the 30s, and family coming from going to California from Oklahoma when they had there was some sort of a drought or and depression and everything else. And the mother, who's a real strong personality, she said, women they just kind of flow. We flow from one thing to the next because we have to. Men live in jerks. And the way she explained it, they get married, that's a jerk. They have a baby, that's a jerk. And then somebody dies in the family, that's a jerk. It's that they don't have that flow.
Interesting. Okay.
So I want to help us flow better. I want to help us to be okay with sharing that part of us that we don't, that we hesitate to share.
And if I can ask, when do you think you came in contact with the permission slip, for lack of better words, that let you know that you could start? Because as you're talking about, because I think a lot of, and a lot of my folks watching, whether it be the men watching or the women in the house watching, might look at it and say, well, how did you know you have permission to do that? Like, how did you come in contact with somebody or something or an event that said, you know what, you don't have to keep doing this?
When I married the second time, I realized that I had to change and I had to examine some of those boxes. But also, I remember telling my now wife at one point in our relationship, and that was prior to us getting married, that you're the first woman that I've ever felt that I could be transparent with. So it's something about, that she gave me the okayness and made me feel comfortable enough to let go of the need to have to protect all of those boxes.
Okay.
So I guess it's finding the right time for you. And I had to do some work. I come from a family of 13, and coming from well, like I said, my father was a minister, and then going into my mom going into a marriage that was not healthy, and living with an alcoholic, and that dance you learn to do, and then having to figure that out. But after my first marriage, I realized how codependent I was. So part of my transformation was getting the help I needed to, first of all, focus on me and being okay with allowing myself the space or asking for help or setting better boundaries.
Sure.
That protected me. So I was going into the marriage, a new marriage, more aware and healthier than I'd been. And I just felt that it was just time to release a lot of those things that were just holding me back.
You used a really good word, and it's funny because I don't know that a lot of people will refer to, or they might not identify codependency in men the same way they do women. I think when people hear that word, they always think about women. Well, women are codependent. Women are codependent. Can you talk a little bit about some of the symptoms that you saw in codependency? Just maybe things that you kind of saw transform in your life from a male's perspective. Of what did that look like?
Well, I didn't have to be Mr. Fix-It. And Mr. Fix-It, and I'm a middle child, so I see everything going on around me. I didn't have to be Mr. Fix-It anymore. We're also taught that in our families of origin, how to deal with conflict. And in our family, it was because of the religious piece, you leaned more on God handling it, and you just kind of stuffed it, and you didn't confront. I confront now much better than I've ever had. I have to protect myself. So that's some of the that codependence was the inability to confront, and always feeling as though I had to help somebody, or it had to be there was a need involved in the relationship.
Like it's my responsibility to make you feel better, or it's like that kind of stuff. Like it's like you kind of take on the role of like making sure everything's smooth for everybody.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
Okay, I get that.
Yeah, and so that was codependence for me. And I'm a professional helper, And so I had to look at that piece because I want my clients to be healthy. And if I'm not exhibiting what I'm teaching you or helping you, the place where I'm helping you to go, then I can't be very healthy. I mean, I'm not going to be a good helper for you. So I think that was my that codependence piece for me, and not setting good boundaries that demanded respect.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I had to work on that piece.
Do you think that that was one of those things in terms of like the boundary setting and that part? Do you think that that was part of the hardest part of the journey in terms of like reestablishing boundaries with people that you already had pre-existing relationships with? Because I'm a fan of saying we teach people how to treat us based on what we do and what we don't do. We establish sort of our presence in the world, for lack of better words. So, do you feel like going through this process has forced, I don't say it's forced, but forced you to reestablish boundaries with people who had already been existing in your life, siblings or loved ones, or kind of what was that like?
Well, I couldn't impose change on them. All I could do is be the change
Okay.
that I would hope uh, they would notice and be curious enough to allow me to share that with them or be a part of that change. Because when you change in a system that's unhealthy, it the dynamics are going to shift all over the
Oh
place.
yeah.
And I think it's during that time you have to be more comfortable in your own skin than ever before, because you're going to have to separate from some relationships. That's not easy.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to reestablish some relationships. So my family they were pretty um, accepting.
Okay.
And I think many of them were ready to make some changes themselves.
So they just kind of needed a trailblazer.
They needed somebody to open the door and shed some light on. Hey, we've been doing this a long time, this dance, and so maybe we might need to look at how we're doing this, because it's working for me. So that's how I shared it with them.
So you're kind of role modeling the change, and they can either choose to come with it or choose not.
Absolutely.
Now, if we have men watching this, man, who are looking at it and they're saying, you know what, I understand what he's saying, I'm down with that, I want to do it, but there's a lot of anxiety, or I fear like people are going to leave me, or there's going to be loneliness, or do you have any advice for those guys who might be standing at this journey saying, okay, I'm ready to make it, but I'm consumed by looking weak. I don't want them to see all, because you're right, I have to be transparent, I have to be vulnerable, I have to be raw. So if we have a guy watching this saying, man, I want what Emmanuel has, how do I get it? What's your best piece of advice in terms of kind of getting that ball and even if it's to call you, hey, you know what, Mr. Manuel is going to be doing this private practice, and and you and I both know sometimes it takes courage just to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need help. What's your piece of advice to that guy who's saying, man, maybe I want what he has?
Take a look at where you are, and if you're comfortable being stuck, it's not the time.
Okay.
But if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then it's time for a change. And I can tell you that when we walk into our whole selves, it's not easy when we start examining us and we put all of those pieces together and we want to live a more congruent and a happier life, because we have to give up some of those habits, and we have to reestablish some things and discover some new things about us. And accept the fact that somewhere along the line, we may have to lose some people. So if you're not ready for that, because it requires a risk, but I will tell you that it's one of the best risks that you will ever take.
Absolutely.
And it will enhance your relationships and help you to be comfortable with self in a way that you've never experienced. So I'd say it's worth the call,
Okay.
but you got to be ready.
But
You have to do the work. Be ready to do the work.
now you mentioned that your wife was supportive, or she was sort of a change catalyst in essence. Like you knew that she would allow you to be open and supportive. Would you recommend that a person talk to family or like a loved one, a wife, or significant other, and say, this is kind of something I'm thinking about. Like, what's your thought about the value of support as a person starts to kind of engage in this journey? Because I would imagine, just listening to you talk today, it's not an overnight. It's not like I went to bed one person, I woke up somebody else. Like it's an evolution.
Mhm.
It's part of this kind of webcast, and one of the series I've been talking a lot about is the evolution of the human spirit, right? It's like I understand I'm embarking on a life commitment. I'm committing to myself for the first time.
Mhm.
What's your thought about how people kind of pull support into that, and how people can call on others to engage with them during
I think that first step, it has to be self-driven
that? Okay.
because sometimes when we reach out to friends and families and people who we have known a long time, and we would assume that they would be on board, but we don't know where they are in their and the position you play in their lives.
Mhm.
And if you move out of that position, their lives change. So I think that initial step has to be an investment that you're willing to make in yourself.
Mhm.
Because after you have decided to move forward, and depending upon how dynamics change and things change in your life, you still are going to be with self.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that you don't need support, but you're going to be surprised at how new opportunities for maybe healthier support may come along.
Okay. Stuff you didn't even see coming.
You didn't see coming
Mhm.
because of old self. And when you start shedding some of that skin and you're able to uh, open yourself up in a way that other people see something different, you're going to have new opportunities
Mhm.
if you allow it.
Sure.
Now, I'm not saying abandon any of your old friends or any of that. I'm not saying that because you'll know
You'll
when
know who they
you
are, what
need
they
to
are.
do that. You'll be able to see it better.
Okay.
So I think the initial step has to come from you.
Okay.
And then you will be able to reconnect with family and friends with the support of myself as your counselor, kind of guiding you along that process. Um, that's my advice
Okay.
because you don't want anybody to take away from that energy.
Right. You don't want anybody to say you can't do it, or
Yeah,
oh, you're fine.
you don't need that.
Do you think so? When you were talking about kind of men specifically that kind of put things into boxes, and you were talking about like categorizing, what's your thoughts about men that deal with serious, not serious, I guess, well, it is serious, but dealing with like mental health concerns, depression or anxiety, or just kind of some of those? Do you think that men are open to discussing that? Do you think enough men get support and help around that? Do you think that's one of the things that we shove in boxes? What's your thoughts?
Well, I think that men are underserved in our society. And then it also goes back to the messages that we receive in terms of reaching out for help. Many times, depending upon the culture and environment that you're in, we're not supported in getting help. So it leads you or lends you to uh, substance abuse and not getting the help you need because of not having as many or having the natural supports that should be there to help you to reach out. But I think it's more um, that piece of masculinity and the need to be strong and I'm okay, I got this, and backing further and further away from people
Mm-hmm.
to hide uh, the need for help
Mm-hmm.
and how desperate that need is, and only you know that. I mean, I know that men we have our good friends, but I look at it when you go into like barber shops and men joke around, and we have topics that you bring up that are safe.
Mm-hmm.
But when it really comes to talking about things that matter, we tend to back away from that as men. So um, those supports are just not as available as it is for women. Women are more amenable to talking about the beauty shop. Women, I have a niece who is a beautician, and periodically I'd stop in. And women are just more open with their stuff, and they help each other. It's like a village.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a need to protect. That's for that in those boxes. We continue to be to hide the things that we don't want others to see, and ultimately become sicker.
Mm-hmm.
So
What do you think is the fear? What do you think is it, obviously you can't speak for all men across the board, but what do you think is the fear in being seen? What do you think is the driving force behind that deep rooted need to protect?
well, the need to protect is I'm a man. I should be able to handle this. And so you're just kind of protecting self as they know self. Because everybody has an image that they project. And the mystique and the image is all about um, the man that they want to project. So that's the fear. The fear is being able to take that mask off
Okay.
and be seen. Um,
Maybe not as
in
who I want people
yeah,
to
in
see me.
the vulnerabilities, and so that's a piece of it, a big piece.
Well, you were talking about women, and it's funny because when I talk to my women, and even when I do a men's group, I was telling you I work with men, and doing those groups, which I think is funny because people are like, you run a men's group? I'm like, heck yeah, look, I got 5 brothers. I feel like I qualify. So anyway, but in reality, one of the things I'll say to them a lot is, you're talking about upbringing, but like some of that mentality, some of that gender bias is built into us very young. For those people that have daughters, we'll say things like, when you go to the bathroom, you're safer in numbers, or when you go here, and so there's like this conditioning where you're safer in numbers. There's a conditioning that says, you're always preparing yourself to kind of lean on, even though we'll get into those little arguments and stuff with other girls. There's this built-in system that says you're safer in numbers. And so when we get into later in life and somebody says, call on somebody, or like you said, kind of this tribe idea, like this is your tribe, this is your group. I think it's more comfortable for women to say, oh, that's right, I am safer in numbers. And we kind of roll into that versus that mentality where a lot of times where it's like we're competitors. And I think a lot of times men are brought into that process where it's like, if you demonstrate a sign that's like weakness, or you demonstrate a vulnerability, it's more like, oh, well, you're just like a girl. And it creates that divide. And it causes them to think two things. One, that this is a weaker or lesser sex, and then it creates that dynamic. And then two, that there's something negative about being open and vulnerable and seen. Would you say that that's accurate?
Well, I think that I would agree. But I would also say that men are taught to stand alone. That you have to protect yourself. So that part that you talked about, that women are greater in numbers, we're taught that we kind of have to do it for ourselves. And so even early on, you're not um, prepared or taught to um, ask for help when you need it. Asking for help is a sign of weakness, and and some men can do that better than others, but it can sometimes be a struggle. So I I would agree with you don't want to be seen as weak. So many men would just kind of struggle with that piece, even if they're having trouble, and not ask for help for fear of that image. I'm not the man. I don't have it together. I don't, I can't do this, especially in front of the women they love or a partner. Um, so, yeah.
Well, I think we're taught the same thing. I think in groups and stuff, I think women are taught the same code in essence of what a man should and shouldn't be. So I can have a woman come into group and break down and cry all day, every day, but if one of the men do it, they're all like, because there's two instances. There's either I want to go fix it and I want to codependent nurture, bring them back to health,
Hmm.
or it's this discomfort of, oh God, we don't know what to do.
Hmm.
Instead of just being in a place with somebody where you're like, man, you're grieving, let me be with you.
Hmm.
It's this knee jerk, fix it or shut it off.
Hmm.
And so I think that, yeah, it creates this dynamic where the message is true. I might, have a loving partner, wife, whatever, daughter, kids, family, who are saying, we love you, want you to be open and vulnerable, but there's also this message that's like, oh, too much.
Hmm. Hmm.
I want you to do it, but I don't want you to be so depressed you don't get out of bed. You need to get your stuff together. What are you doing? I don't want you to be so anxious that you can't go out. You need to pull it together.
Absolutely.
And so I think there's that message that happens. And I would imagine, and something you're speaking on, is being able to create a platform for men to find that healing, to become the whole self.
That's true.
How do we have access to that?
Yeah.
So my question to you is this. So if a gentleman comes to you and he is ready, what can he expect to get from you?
Well, what they can expect to get from me, first of all, is an opportunity to be heard,
Okay.
because I have to listen. And I need to know what they're willing, what they want for themselves in order to guide the process. Um, and I'm hoping that they will be able to get a sense of okayness within that process if we are able to um, agree that this is this is going to be a relationship that will be that's needed, and they can feel supported, and that they allow me to be a part of that relationship. I'm hoping that we can begin to start a new journey um, in their lives, um, depending upon what the issues are, different modalities of therapy I would use to get there.
Sure.
But first and foremost is an opportunity to be heard and to feel safe, and then establish where it is they want to go. Mostly motivational interview piece starting out, and active listening, because I want them to feel safe. Um, Opening up those new doors is going to require some that they feel safe and okay.
I love you keep using that word and it keeps triggering my mind every time you say it. And it just keeps kicking over and over. And I wanted to bring it out highlighted is what, in your opinion, what is the value for men? What does safety look like? As far as coming into counseling, coming in and opening up and being vulnerable, what do you see as safety?
I
What's a
think
safe
safety
environment?
feels like I'm understood. It's the first piece is to be heard and then be validated.
Okay.
That's the part where you're validated. Um, and then affirm as we make the changes that are going through the changes that you to affirm those changes, and say, we're making some progress. You're doing well. You're okayness uh, to move on. So being validated and being heard.
Well, and I wonder because you mentioned earlier, if you don't mind me going back to sort of you sharing that story about your dad, kind of looking for that validation and looking for that sort of, yeah, I'm okay. I am in my own right, in my own being. I'm okay. I'm validated as a good man, a person, son, whatever. Like, do you think that a lot of men also look for that. And it's one of those things that it's uncomfortable to talk about. Like, I'm looking for that validation from whoever, that I'm a good husband or a good wife or a good son or whatever. Like, do you see that that is one of the things that a lot of people don't want to talk about needing?
I believe. I mean, that's another piece to it. I think that um, men in relationships, um, they need that part from their spouses, partners, that validates their ability to be transparent, and makes them, that it helps them to feel safe um, with however they want to show that. I mean, how they want to give that back to their partners. I hope that's, you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
understand that.
No, yeah, I get what you're saying. That's why I was kind of asking, like, because when you were talking about creating safety, like that validation part is important.
It's a big piece of
Mhm.
it.
I believe wholeheartedly, and the longer I stay just in my own journey, the longer I've met people, the more I interact with kids, whether it's our young folks or our adults. Like, I believe that all of us strive for that sense of love and belonging. We all strive for that place that we fit. That I feel like I'm chosen here, that I feel like I belong here, that I feel like, whether it's in my marriage or as a parenting role or even at work, like that I feel like what I contribute is appreciated and validated and respected.
Mhm.
And so when you were talking, that's what it made me think of. Like, being in a place that is safe for me is that place that I can be imperfect, that I can show up, but I'm still gonna always have a seat here,
Mhm.
whatever that looks like,
Mhm.
whether it's physically or in your heart, in your home, in your whatever. Like, that this sense of love and belonging exists, um, irregardless of because you and I both know it, and we work with a population of people, and because humans are human, we a lot of us have made a lot of mistakes. A lot of us carry a lot of shame, especially in some of the populations we work with,
Mhm. Mhm.
where I haven't always been my best self. I've made some horrible choices, and in that have hurt a lot of people,
Mhm.
including me first.
Mhm.
So when you were talking about safety, that's kind of what it made me think about. Like, obviously, I can't predict their future, but I know for myself when somebody picks up the phone and calls and says, "I want to come to see," somewhere in their life there's a great pain, and I refer to them all the time as soul wounds. You know, what does that look like for me to walk into the room and say, I have this hurt. It's a soul wound. I'm gonna show it to you, but it scared me. How do we create a safe environment for those guys? And I think you're talking about that. This idea that if you listen, if you spend time and you're focused on what somebody has to say, that of its own kind of validates. Would you say?
Mhm. It does, and I think a lot of times the men that there are quite a few men that the term I put on them are walking wounded, with a lot of those hurts and shame and guilt and all of that. And when they walk in my office or they pick up the phone and call me, I want them to realize that that's a part of their lives that can be reshaped. And it's going to require some work. I keep saying that part because it does.
Absolutely.
Uh, Forgiveness is a big piece of it. Making some amends is another piece of it. Um, but meeting them right where they are and being able to go from there. But that's part of, I can accept as they walk in the door, but I expect change
Mhm,
because I owe that to them.
mhm,
And I owe it to them in a way to hold them accountable
mhm.
in order for us to get where we need to go in our journey, in the work that we'll be doing. So I hope that
Yeah.
makes it as clear as I can make it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, ready to round out your last questions?
Okay.
Very excited. He's like, sure, we'll do. So, for anybody watching, what is the one thing that you really hope stuck out just from our conversation, our engagement? What do you hope somebody watching this walks away with from today? What do you hope is the thought that kind of resonates with them?
If you're a man and you're watching, uh, and you're walking wounded, or you just want to experience a new self, give yourself that opportunity. Um, what do you have to lose? It will be the best investment you ever made. Um, and I want to be a part of that. Um, we all need a drum major, um, but we need a drum major that's beating the drum at the same tempo that we're able to go. And so I want to be that drum major. I want to be that person that can help them uh, be okay with taking some new steps in their life.
Excellent. I think that's great. I mean, so as we kind of said in the beginning of today's series, Emmanuel's getting ready to kind of start into his own private practice, and being able to really work with men and have a place for specific uh, services that are generated towards wholeness and towards wellness. And I think it's a population, like we talked about, that's really it's really underserved, because there's such a stigma attached to getting help, and there's such a stigma attached to reaching out to people. And so when we initially started talking about this series, that was one of the most important parts of this discussion, is just, hey, how do we put a name to some of this stuff? Like when you're talking about compartmentalizing and putting things in boxes, like hopefully there's a guy out here sitting here watching this going, I do that. I didn't even know that's what it was. I that's exactly what I've been doing. Or to, a wife who might be saying to her husband, be open, be open, be open. And then when they start to put things in place to shut them down and don't even realize it. So I wanted us to be able to, because this is all about human experiences, real people doing real stuff, just talk about it. In my opinion, and we kind of talked a little bit about it, there is no shame in being imperfect. And the sicker I get, or the darker, for lack of better words, my world gets, is because I keep silent. Silence hasn't protected anybody. And so being able to just kind of speak on that. So we have a start date hopefully coming soon, or?
Within the next 5 months. Just trying to put things in place, and hopefully we'll be able to do telemed here within the next couple of months. But to have a physical site, that would be 5 months down the road.
Okay.
But telehealth, I'm working on getting that set up.
Excellent.
So I'm excited about it, and I appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's been great. It's been really, really good.
I hope so.
Very cool. All right. Thank you kindly, sir. So.